Today, I want to speak about something most people never truly understand until they experience it themselves: the first night in prison. Movies often show prison as violence, gangs, and survival battles. News headlines reduce it to crime and punishment. But what almost no one talks about is the psychological reality of that very first night behind bars. Imagine this. One moment, you are living your normal life. You have freedom, routines, family, your phone, your bed, your identity. Then suddenly, the doors close behind you with a loud metallic sound that feels heavier than anything you have ever heard. And in that moment, reality changes completely. The first night in prison is not just about entering a building. It is about entering fear, uncertainty, regret, and isolation all at once. For many inmates, sleep becomes impossible. The mind races endlessly. Questions repeat again and again. What will happen to me? How long will I survive here? Will my family be okay? Will my life ever return to normal? The silence can feel terrifying, yet the noise can feel even worse. Shouting from cells, footsteps in hallways, metal doors slamming, distant arguments, and the overwhelming feeling that there is no escape. What nobody talks about is the emotional breakdown that often happens internally. Some people cry quietly. Some stare at walls for hours. Others try to act tough while fighting panic inside. That first night strips away pride and ego. It forces a person to confront themselves honestly, sometimes for the very first time. And while society focuses on punishment, we rarely discuss humanity. Many prisoners are guilty of serious mistakes. But many are also people who grew up in violence, poverty, addiction, or broken systems. Some are innocent. Some are mentally ill. Some are simply lost. The first night in prison becomes a mirror. It reflects every decision, every regret, and every fear. But strangely, for some people, it also becomes the beginning of change. There are stories of individuals who used that darkness to rebuild themselves through education, faith, discipline, and reflection. They discovered that while prison takes away freedom physically, it does not have to destroy the human spirit completely. This is why conversations about prison should go beyond fear and punishment. We should talk about rehabilitation, mental health, second chances, and the conditions that create crime in the first place. Because if prison only creates more trauma, anger, and hopelessness, society itself pays the price when inmates eventually return to the outside world. The reality no one talks about is this. The first night in prison is not only a punishment of the body, it is a test of the mind, identity, and soul. And perhaps understanding that reality can make us more aware, more responsible, and more compassionate as a society. The first night in prison is often described by former inmates as one of the most mentally and emotionally intense experiences of their lives. It is not simply about entering a jail cell. It is about suddenly losing control over every aspect of life. In just a few hours, a person goes from living in the outside world with freedom, familiarity, and personal comfort to being locked inside a cold and unfamiliar environment filled with uncertainty and fear. For many people, the emotional shock begins the moment the prison doors close behind them. The sound of metal gates locking can feel terrifying because it symbolizes the complete loss of freedom. At that point, reality truly hits. The person realizes they cannot leave whenever they want, cannot call family freely, cannot walk outside, and cannot return to normal life. Even simple things such as choosing what to eat, when to sleep, or where to go are no longer under their control. The mind becomes overwhelmed with thoughts and fears. Questions begin repeating endlessly. What will happen to me here? Will I be safe? How long can I survive this? What are my family members thinking right now? Will my life ever recover after this? Because of this emotional pressure, sleep becomes almost impossible during the first night. Many prisoners remain awake for hours staring at the walls or ceiling while anxiety keeps growing. Every sound inside the prison feels louder and more threatening. Footsteps in the hallway, shouting from distant cells, doors slamming shut, keys rattling, or guards yelling commands. These sounds constantly remind the inmate that they are trapped in a harsh and controlled environment. Fear is also a major psychological factor. New prisoners often do not know who they can trust or what dangers may exist around them. Stories they have heard about violence, gangs, and prison culture increase their anxiety even more. Some prisoners become extremely quiet and withdrawn, while others pretend to be emotionally strong to hide their fear. Internally, however, many are struggling with panic, regret, humiliation, and hopelessness. Another difficult reality is the feeling of isolation. During the first night, inmates are separated from everything familiar: family, friends, routines, technology, privacy, and emotional support. For some individuals, this sudden isolation creates deep sadness or emotional breakdowns. It is common for inmates to silently cry, replay past decisions in their minds, or think about moments they wish they could change. The psychological pressure can become even more intense for people who have never experienced prison before. The environment feels unfamiliar and intimidating. The strict rules, constant surveillance, and loss of personal identity can make individuals feel powerless. Some inmates describe the first night as feeling like time suddenly slows down, where every minute feels painfully long. In many cases, the first night also forces people into deep self-reflection. Without distractions from the outside world, individuals are left alone with their thoughts, regrets, mistakes, and fears about the future. For some, this becomes the beginning of emotional change or personal realization, while for others it becomes a moment of mental collapse and despair. One of the harshest realities of the first night in prison is the sudden loss of freedom. Most people do not fully understand the value of freedom until it is taken away from them completely. In everyday life, people make countless choices without even thinking about them. When to wake up, where to go, what to eat, who to talk to, when to use a phone, or even when to step outside for fresh air. In prison, those basic choices disappear almost instantly. The transition is often shocking because it happens so quickly. A person who was once living a normal life in the outside world suddenly becomes part of a system where every movement is controlled. From the moment they enter prison, they are told where to stand, where to walk, when to eat, when to sleep, and when they are allowed to speak or move. The independence they once took for granted is replaced by strict rules, schedules, and constant supervision. For many inmates, the emotional impact of losing freedom becomes strongest during the first night. Sitting alone inside a locked cell creates a powerful feeling of helplessness. The realization slowly settles in that they cannot leave, cannot open the door themselves, and cannot return home whenever they want. Even looking through prison bars or hearing locks click shut can create a deep psychological sense of being trapped. The loss of privacy is another painful part of this experience. Outside prison, people are used to personal space and private moments. In prison, privacy almost disappears completely. Inmates are constantly watched by guards, surrounded by other prisoners, and forced to live under surveillance. Even simple personal activities may happen in shared spaces, making many inmates feel uncomfortable, exposed, or humiliated during their first days. Another major emotional struggle is separation from loved ones. During the first night, many prisoners begin thinking deeply about their families, children, parents, or partners. The inability to simply call, visit, hug, or comfort loved ones creates emotional pain that can feel unbearable. Some prisoners become overwhelmed by guilt because they know their actions have affected the people they care about. Others feel anxiety because they do not know how their families are coping without them. The removal of freedom also affects a person's identity. In normal life, people define themselves through their jobs, education, social status, routines, hobbies, or relationships. Inside prison, those identities can suddenly feel meaningless. Instead of being known by their achievements or personality, inmates may feel reduced to a prison number or criminal label. This can create feelings of shame, emptiness, and emotional confusion. Simple daily comforts also become meaningful once they are gone. A comfortable bed, homemade food, walking outside freely, using the internet, listening to music peacefully, or even sitting alone quietly are things many people stop appreciating in normal life. On the first night in prison, inmates often realize how valuable those ordinary freedoms truly were. The strict environment of prison constantly reinforces this loss of control. Loud commands from guards, locked schedules, limited communication, and restricted movement remind inmates that they no longer have authority over their own lives. This can create frustration, anger, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion, especially for people who are not mentally prepared for such a drastic change. For first-time prisoners, the experience can feel emotionally crushing because freedom is not removed gradually. It disappears all at once. The shock of that sudden change often becomes one of the most painful psychological experiences of imprisonment. One of the most misunderstood aspects of prison is the belief that the hardest part is only the physical environment. People often imagine uncomfortable beds, poor food, locked cells, or harsh surroundings as the greatest difficulties inmates face. While those conditions can certainly be challenging, many former prisoners explain that the real suffering during the first night is psychological rather than physical. The mental stress can become so intense that it feels heavier than the prison walls themselves. The first night in prison places enormous pressure on the human mind. Fear, uncertainty, regret, loneliness, and anxiety all arrive at once, creating emotional overload. Unlike physical pain, mental stress is invisible, which makes it harder for others to notice or understand. An inmate may appear calm on the outside while internally struggling with panic, confusion, or emotional collapse. One of the biggest causes of stress is uncertainty. New prisoners often have no idea what will happen next. They do not fully understand prison rules, inmate behavior, daily routines, or how they will be treated by others. This uncertainty creates constant fear because the mind naturally imagines worst-case scenarios. Questions repeat endlessly. Will I be attacked? Will I survive here mentally? How long will this feeling last? What if my future is destroyed forever? The mind becomes trapped in overthinking. Since there are very few distractions during the first night, prisoners are left alone with their thoughts for long periods of time. Many begin replaying the events that brought them to prison, thinking about mistakes, bad decisions, arguments, or actions they wish they could undo. Regret becomes emotionally painful because there is no immediate escape from those memories. Guilt also becomes a major emotional burden. Some inmates begin thinking about the pain their imprisonment may have caused their family members. Parents may think about their children growing up without them. Sons and daughters may imagine their parents feeling ashamed or heartbroken. Married prisoners may fear losing relationships or trust. These thoughts can create deep sadness and emotional breakdowns during the first night. Anxiety inside prison can also become physical. Even though the stress begins mentally, the body reacts strongly to it. Some inmates experience shaking, sweating, chest tightness, headaches, nausea, rapid heartbeat, or difficulty breathing because of extreme fear and panic. Others cannot eat or sleep properly for days because their minds remain in a constant state of tension and alertness. Sleep deprivation makes the mental pressure even worse. During the first night, many prisoners remain awake because their thoughts will not stop racing. The environment itself also contributes to stress. Loud metal doors, distant shouting, arguments, footsteps in hallways, and harsh lighting prevent relaxation. Every unfamiliar sound increases fear and reminds inmates they are in a dangerous and unfamiliar place. Another difficult psychological challenge is emotional isolation. Many prisoners feel completely alone during their first night, even when surrounded by other inmates. They may believe nobody understands their fear or emotional pain. Some individuals avoid showing emotions because they think appearing weak could make them vulnerable. As a result, they suffer silently while trying to hide their anxiety behind a tough appearance. For some inmates, the mental stress becomes so severe that it affects their sense of identity and self-worth. They may begin feeling hopeless, ashamed, or emotionally broken. Thoughts about lost opportunities, damaged reputations, and uncertain futures can create deep emotional despair. In extreme cases, the psychological pressure may lead to depression, panic attacks, or thoughts of self-harm. The emotional strain is often strongest because prison removes normal coping mechanisms. Outside prison, people deal with stress by talking to loved ones, going outside, using technology, listening to music, working, or distracting themselves with everyday activities. In prison, many of those comforts disappear. The inmate is left face to face with their thoughts in an environment filled with tension and restriction. Many former prisoners later explain that the physical discomfort of prison eventually becomes easier to tolerate over time, but the mental pressure during the first night is what truly shakes a person emotionally. It is the moment when fear becomes real, consequences become undeniable, and the mind struggles to adjust to an entirely new reality. For most people entering prison for the first time, the environment itself becomes one of the most frightening parts of the experience. The first night is not only emotionally stressful because of fear or uncertainty, but also because the prison surroundings feel cold, hostile, and deeply intimidating. Everything inside the facility, the sounds, the structure, the routines, the atmosphere, and the behavior of others, constantly reminds inmates that they are in a place built around control, punishment, and survival. The intimidation often begins the moment a person enters the prison building. The sight of high walls, barbed wire, locked gates, security checkpoints, surveillance cameras, and armed officers immediately creates psychological pressure. These physical barriers symbolize complete restriction and loss of freedom. Many first-time inmates describe feeling shocked by how quickly the outside world disappears once those heavy doors close behind them. The prison environment can feel emotionally overwhelming because it is so unfamiliar. Most people are not used to living in a place where every movement is monitored and every action follows strict rules. The atmosphere feels tense and unpredictable. New prisoners constantly feel as though they must remain alert because they do not yet understand the culture, power structures, or behavior of other inmates. One of the strongest sources of intimidation is the sound inside prison. During the first night, inmates hear noises they have never experienced in normal life. Metal doors slamming loudly, keys rattling, guards shouting commands, distant arguments, footsteps echoing through hallways, alarms, banging on cell bars, and voices coming from other cells. These sounds create a constant sense of tension and uneasiness. Even silence can feel frightening because it carries uncertainty and anticipation. The physical appearance of prison cells also contributes to emotional discomfort. The cells are often small, cold, plain, and lacking comfort. Hard beds, dim lighting, concrete walls, metal toilets, and limited personal space make the environment feel harsh and depressing. For someone entering prison for the first time, sitting alone in such a confined space can create feelings of fear, sadness, and emotional suffocation. Another intimidating aspect is the presence of other inmates. New prisoners usually do not know who they can trust or how others might behave. Stories about prison violence, gangs, fights, and intimidation increase anxiety even before any interaction occurs. First-time inmates often become extremely cautious, observing everyone carefully while trying not to attract negative attention. Many prisoners also feel pressure to appear emotionally strong, even when they are terrified internally. In prison culture, showing fear or weakness may sometimes be seen as vulnerability. Because of this, inmates may hide their emotions, avoid eye contact, or remain quiet during their first night while internally struggling with panic and insecurity. This emotional tension adds to the overall intimidation of the environment. The strict control exercised by prison authorities also affects the psychological atmosphere. Guards give orders, schedules are enforced rigidly, and inmates must follow rules at all times. Even small actions may require permission. For people who are used to personal independence, this level of control can feel humiliating and mentally exhausting. The environment constantly reinforces the idea that inmates no longer control their own lives. The lack of comfort and emotional warmth inside prison makes the atmosphere feel even colder psychologically. There are no familiar surroundings, no supportive family members nearby, and very little sense of safety or belonging. Many inmates feel emotionally disconnected from the outside world during their first night, which increases loneliness and fear. Time also feels different inside prison. Hours can seem painfully slow, especially during the first night when anxiety is at its highest. Some inmates stare at walls or ceilings for long periods while listening to prison noises around them, feeling trapped inside an environment that seems impossible to escape. The intimidating surroundings make every minute feel heavier and emotionally draining. One of the most overlooked realities of prison life is that many inmates hide what they truly feel inside. During the first night in prison, fear, anxiety, sadness, regret, and confusion can become emotionally overwhelming, yet many prisoners make strong efforts to conceal those emotions from others. In the prison environment, appearing emotionally vulnerable is often seen as dangerous, which forces many inmates to build emotional walls even while struggling internally. For first-time prisoners especially, the pressure to appear strong begins almost immediately. They quickly realize they are entering an unfamiliar world where they do not know the intentions, personalities, or behavior of the people around them. Because of this uncertainty, many inmates become extremely careful about how they act, speak, or show emotion. They may believe that displaying fear, crying openly, or appearing weak could make them targets for intimidation, manipulation, or disrespect from other inmates. As a result, many prisoners create a false image of confidence and emotional control. Outwardly, they may remain silent, expressionless, or tough-looking, while internally experiencing panic, loneliness, or emotional breakdowns. Some inmates force themselves to act calm even when their minds are overwhelmed with fear about what might happen next. The emotional suppression inside prison can become mentally exhausting. Human beings naturally need emotional support, comfort, and connection during stressful situations. However, prison culture often discourages emotional openness. Many inmates feel they must constantly protect themselves emotionally because trust is difficult to build in such an environment. This creates a situation where people suffer privately while pretending everything is under control. During the first night, hidden emotions often become strongest when inmates are alone in their cells. Without distractions, many begin thinking deeply about their families, mistakes, lost opportunities, or uncertain futures. Some silently cry after lights go out. Others stare into darkness, replaying painful memories, or imagining how their loved ones are reacting outside prison. These emotional moments usually remain hidden from others because inmates fear judgment or vulnerability. Regret is one of the most common emotions prisoners try to hide. Many inmates think about decisions that change their lives forever. Some replay arguments, crimes, addictions, or moments where they could have chosen differently. This self-reflection can create deep emotional pain, yet many prisoners bury these feelings behind silence because they believe admitting emotional suffering may make them appear weak. Fear is also heavily concealed. Even inmates who appear physically strong or emotionally cold may internally feel terrified during their first days in prison. Fear of violence, fear of humiliation, fear of isolation, fear of losing family connections, and fear of the future all become psychological burdens. Since prison often rewards emotional toughness, inmates may avoid expressing these fears openly. Another reason inmates hide emotions is survival. In prison, reputation and perception can affect how others treat a person. Some prisoners believe they must constantly appear mentally strong in order to avoid conflict or gain respect. This pressure creates emotional masking, where individuals hide sadness, vulnerability, or emotional pain behind aggression, silence, humor, or emotional numbness. The constant suppression of emotion can eventually damage mental health. When people repeatedly bottle up fear, grief, stress, or guilt without healthy emotional release, psychological pressure increases over time. Some inmates become emotionally detached, struggling to trust others or express feelings naturally. Others develop anger issues, anxiety, depression, or emotional instability because their emotions remain trapped internally for long periods. Isolation inside prison makes emotional hiding even more severe. Many inmates feel they cannot fully trust anyone, not other prisoners, guards, or even themselves emotionally. This creates loneliness, where people suffer mentally while surrounded by others. A prisoner may spend hours silently fighting emotional pain while appearing completely normal externally. The first night in prison is often the beginning of this emotional concealment. It teaches many inmates that survival in prison is not only physical, but also psychological. They learn quickly that emotions become private battles fought internally, hidden behind controlled expressions and forced emotional strength. One of the most powerful and emotionally difficult realities of prison is the way it forces individuals into deep self-reflection. During the first night in prison, many inmates experience something they may have avoided for years: complete confrontation with their own thoughts, decisions, mistakes, fears, and personal identity. Without the distractions of normal life, the human mind becomes impossible to escape. In everyday life, people often stay busy with work, social media, entertainment, relationships, or routines that keep them distracted from uncomfortable thoughts. Many individuals avoid thinking deeply about their actions or emotional struggles because life outside prison moves quickly. Inside a prison cell, however, those distractions disappear almost completely. The silence, isolation, and restriction create an environment where the mind turns inward. For many inmates, the first night becomes the first time they are truly alone with themselves. Sitting inside a locked cell creates a powerful psychological effect. There is nowhere to go, nothing familiar to hold on to, and very little to distract the mind from replaying the past. Thoughts begin surfacing repeatedly: memories, regrets, arguments, bad choices, lost opportunities, and painful consequences. Many prisoners start questioning the path that brought them to prison. They think about moments where life could have changed if different decisions had been made. Some remember warnings they ignored, people they hurt, or chances they wasted. Others reflect on anger, addiction, greed, violence, or emotional pain that slowly led them toward destruction. This process of self-examination can become emotionally overwhelming because prison removes the ability to run away from personal truth. Regret becomes one of the strongest emotions during self-reflection. Inmates may think deeply about family members they disappointed, children they cannot see, relationships they destroyed, or futures they lost. The emotional weight of these realizations often feels heavier during the quiet hours of the night, when there are no distractions to silence the mind. For some individuals, prison also forces reflection on childhood experiences and personal trauma. Many inmates come from backgrounds involving poverty, abuse, violence, neglect, addiction, or broken homes. During isolation, unresolved emotional wounds sometimes resurface. Prisoners may begin understanding how past pain influenced their choices, anger, or behavior over time. Another painful part of self-reflection is confronting personal responsibility. Outside prison, some people blame others for their problems: society, family, circumstances, or bad luck. Inside prison, especially during the first night, many inmates begin realizing that certain choices and actions led them to their current situation. Accepting responsibility can be emotionally difficult because it requires honesty with oneself. The prison environment intensifies this reflection because time feels slower. Hours inside a cell can feel endless, giving inmates long periods to think deeply about life. Without normal freedom or daily activities, the mind naturally focuses on identity, purpose, mistakes, and fear about the future. Some inmates describe this mental process as emotionally exhausting because painful thoughts repeat continuously. For certain prisoners, self-reflection creates hopelessness and emotional breakdown. They may become consumed by guilt, shame, or despair about what they have lost. Thoughts about damaged reputations, broken trust, or uncertain futures can make them feel mentally trapped. In severe cases, this emotional pressure contributes to depression, anxiety, or feelings of worthlessness. However, self-reflection can also become the beginning of personal change for some individuals. Many prisoners eventually use this time to reevaluate their values, behavior, and direction in life. They may begin understanding the consequences of their actions more clearly than ever before. Some decide to pursue education, religion, discipline, therapy, or self-improvement because prison forced them to confront realities they had ignored for years. The first night in prison often marks the beginning of this internal journey. It is the moment when external distractions disappear and individuals face their own minds directly. Whether painful or transformative, prison self-reflection becomes a deeply emotional experience that changes the way many inmates see themselves and their lives. One of the biggest misconceptions about prison is the belief that all prisoners are the same. Society often views inmates only through the lens of their crimes, ignoring the complex personal histories, struggles, and circumstances that shaped their lives long before they entered prison. During the first night in prison, many inmates are surrounded by people from completely different backgrounds, experiences, and life stories. Some are dangerous criminals, while others are individuals who made one terrible mistake, suffered through difficult environments, or became trapped in destructive situations they never fully escaped. Prison populations are made up of people from many different social, economic, and emotional backgrounds. Some inmates grew up in stable families with education and opportunity, while others were raised in poverty, violence, neglect, or abuse. For many prisoners, crime did not begin suddenly in adulthood. It developed slowly through years of hardship, trauma, poor influences, or lack of support. Poverty is one major factor connected to many prison cases. People raised in poor communities often face limited education, unemployment, unsafe neighborhoods, and fewer opportunities to build stable lives. Some individuals become involved in theft, drug dealing, gangs, or illegal activities because they feel survival leaves them with few alternatives. While poverty never excuses criminal behavior, it often creates conditions where crime becomes more common. Many prisoners also come from violent environments. Some witness domestic abuse, street violence, addiction, or criminal activity from a very young age. Growing up in such conditions can affect emotional development, decision-making, and mental health. Children exposed to constant violence sometimes normalize aggression or develop emotional trauma that follows them into adulthood. One of the biggest misconceptions about prison is the belief that all prisoners are the same. Society often views inmates only through the lens of their crimes, ignoring the complex personal histories, struggles, and circumstances that shaped their lives long before they entered prison. During the first night in prison, many inmates are surrounded by people from completely different backgrounds, experiences, and life stories. Some are dangerous criminals, while others are individuals who made one terrible mistake, suffered through difficult environments, or became trapped in destructive situations they never fully escaped. Prison populations are made up of people from many different social, economic, and emotional backgrounds. Some inmates grew up in stable families with education and opportunity, while others were raised in poverty, violence, neglect, or abuse. For many prisoners, crime did not begin suddenly in adulthood. It developed slowly through years of hardship, trauma, poor influences, or lack of support. Poverty is one major factor connected to many prison cases. People raised in poor communities often face limited education, unemployment, unsafe neighborhoods, and fewer opportunities to build stable lives. Some individuals become involved in theft, drug dealing, gangs, or illegal activities because they feel survival leaves them with few alternatives. While poverty never excuses criminal behavior, it often creates conditions where crime becomes more common. Many prisoners also come from violent environments. Some witness domestic abuse, street violence, addiction, or criminal activity from a very young age. Growing up in such conditions can affect emotional development, decision-making, and mental health. Children exposed to constant violence sometimes normalize aggression or develop emotional trauma that follows them into adulthood. Addiction is another common reality inside prisons. Many inmates struggle with alcohol or drug dependency, which can heavily influence criminal behavior. Some individuals commit crimes while under the influence, while others break laws to support addictions they can no longer control. Substance abuse often destroys relationships, financial stability, mental health, and judgment long before imprisonment occurs. Mental illness is also far more common in prisons than many people realize. Anxiety disorders, depression, bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and other psychological conditions affect many inmates. Some prisoners never received proper mental health treatment outside prison due to poverty, stigma, or lack of healthcare access. Without support, untreated mental illness can contribute to impulsive behavior, addiction, emotional instability, or criminal activity. Another important reality is that not every inmate is a hardened criminal. Some people enter prison because of reckless decisions, emotional mistakes, financial desperation, or moments of anger that permanently change their lives. A single poor decision can sometimes destroy years of stability and lead to imprisonment. First-time offenders often feel emotionally overwhelmed during their first night because they never imagined they would end up in such an environment. There are also inmates who maintain their innocence and claim they were wrongfully convicted. Whether guilty or innocent, prison places all individuals into the same harsh system where fear, uncertainty, and emotional stress affect everyone differently. The first night becomes especially terrifying for inmates who believe they should not be there at all. Prison also contains individuals from vastly different educational and social backgrounds. Some inmates are uneducated and struggled their entire lives, while others once held respected careers, businesses, or professional positions before making mistakes that led to incarceration. This mixture of people creates a complex environment where inmates may share the same prison space despite living completely different lives before imprisonment. Many prisoners carry emotional pain long before entering prison. Childhood neglect, abandonment, trauma, racism, bullying, family breakdowns, and emotional isolation often shape personal behavior over time. Some individuals never learned healthy ways to deal with anger, stress, or emotional suffering. Without guidance or support, destructive coping mechanisms sometimes led them toward crime. Understanding that prisoners come from different backgrounds does not mean excusing harmful actions or ignoring victims. Crime still carries serious consequences, and accountability remains important. However, recognizing the human complexity behind prison populations allows society to better understand why crime happens and why rehabilitation matters. The first night in prison often becomes a moment where these different life stories collide in one environment. Behind every prison cell is a person with a unique history, personal struggles, emotional wounds, fears, regrets, and circumstances that shaped the road leading to incarceration. One of the most important conversations surrounding prisons is whether the system should focus only on punishment or also on rehabilitation. While prison is meant to hold individuals accountable for crimes they have committed, many experts, former inmates, and social researchers argue that punishment alone is not enough to create real change. The first night in prison often becomes the beginning of emotional fear and suffering, but what happens after that can determine whether a person leaves prison worse than before or becomes capable of rebuilding their life. Punishment may temporarily remove dangerous individuals from society, but rehabilitation focuses on changing behavior, improving thinking patterns, and helping inmates become productive members of society after release. Without rehabilitation, prisons can become places where anger, trauma, hopelessness, and criminal behavior continue to grow rather than decrease. Many prisoners enter prison already carrying emotional pain, addiction problems, poor education, mental health struggles, or violent life experiences. Simply locking a person away without addressing those deeper issues often fails to solve the root causes behind criminal behavior. If inmates leave prison with the same mindset, same addictions, same emotional instability, and same lack of opportunity, there is a high chance they may return to crime after release. The first night in prison is often filled with fear, regret, and emotional shock. For some individuals, this becomes a wake-up call that makes them realize how badly their life has changed. However, personal transformation rarely happens through fear alone. Real rehabilitation requires support systems that encourage growth, responsibility, discipline, and self-improvement. Education is one of the strongest tools for rehabilitation. Many inmates never had access to proper education before prison. Learning new skills, studying subjects, or completing qualifications can help prisoners build confidence and prepare for legal employment after release. Education also changes how people think, solve problems, and view their future possibilities. Mental health treatment is another major part of rehabilitation. Many inmates suffer from anxiety, depression, trauma, anger disorders, or emotional instability that influence their behavior long before prison. Counseling, therapy, and psychological support can help inmates understand themselves better and develop healthier emotional control. Without mental health care, emotional problems may continue worsening inside prison. Addiction recovery programs are equally important. A large number of crimes are connected to drug or alcohol abuse. Rehabilitation programs that focus on recovery, discipline, and emotional healing can reduce the chances of inmates returning to addiction after release. Many former prisoners explain that overcoming addiction completely changed the direction of their lives. Rehabilitation also teaches responsibility and accountability in healthier ways. True rehabilitation does not ignore crime or excuse harmful behavior. Instead, it helps inmates fully understand the consequences of their actions while encouraging them to become better individuals. Programs focused on self-discipline, conflict resolution, emotional control, and personal responsibility can help inmates rebuild damaged thinking patterns. Another important reason rehabilitation matters is because most prisoners eventually return to society. If prisons only create bitterness, anger, violence, and hopelessness, those emotional problems do not stay inside prison walls forever. They return to communities when inmates are released. Society benefits more when former prisoners leave prison educated, mentally stable, skilled, and motivated to live legally. The prison environment itself can either support or destroy rehabilitation. In overcrowded or violent prisons, inmates may become more traumatized, aggressive, or emotionally hardened over time. Constant exposure to violence, fear, and hopelessness can push people deeper into criminal thinking. On the other hand, prisons that provide education, mental health support, vocational training, and structured rehabilitation programs often see better long-term outcomes. Many former inmates who successfully changed their lives describe prison as a turning point rather than simply a punishment. Some discovered religion, education, discipline, or personal purpose while incarcerated. Others rebuilt relationships with family members, overcame addiction, or developed goals they never had before prison. These transformations usually happened because rehabilitation opportunities existed alongside punishment. The first night in prison may break a person emotionally, but rehabilitation determines whether that brokenness leads to destruction or personal rebuilding. Without guidance, support, and opportunities for change, prison can become a cycle that repeats endlessly for many individuals. In the end, the first night in prison is more than just the beginning of a sentence. It is the beginning of a confrontation with reality. It strips away comfort, silences distractions, and forces a person to sit alone with their thoughts, their past, and their choices. For some, it becomes a night filled with fear and regret. For others, it becomes the first moment of awareness that change is necessary. But beyond the walls and the rules, it also raises a deeper question for society, whether prisons should only hold people accountable or also help rebuild them. Because what happens in that first night often echoes far beyond it, shaping not just the prisoner, but the kind of person they may become when they walk out again.